Now this was this advert in August 1996, and it fascinated me that just a few months later this was the next one that came out, the packet stitched up, in February 1997. And that was almost the end of that campaign. It was almost as if Charles Saatchi realised he had been rumbled. I will never know, but as if he realised he had been rumbled and he couldn't carry on doing what he had been doing because it had now been exposed. So Walter Wink, the great American theologian, who's also turned Quaker in his old age, now unfortunately with dementia, he's very old and unwell. But Walter talks about the importance of naming the powers that be, unmasking the powers that be, in other words, unveiling the psychodynamics by which they operate, in order to engage non-violently with the powers that be, to call the powers that be back to their higher God-given vocation. And that's what we have to do with our economy. So, we're looking here at the perversion of deep emotions all the way through to love. And I talk about the pornography of... Oh, sorry, I just want to put this in Quaker context here. The other morning when I was preparing this presentation, I was reading Pierre Lacou, the French Quaker here, in his little book here. And he sums up exactly what I'm saying to you just now. And I've distilled from 3 pages what he's saying. The distracted person, as the etymology of the word indicates, is one who is pulled in this direction and that. That's the postmodern condition for you. The mind is fragmented into trivialities. Advertisers know that attention is always attention for something. They strive, therefore, to play on one or other of our tendencies, our instincts. Attention in this case has a mesmeric effect, forcing us to look. And notice, I put it in italics, advertising is the art of subjecting us to this form of violence. I don't mean all advertising. I don't mean advertising that spreads necessary and useful information about products. I am talking specifically here, or at least I can't speak for him, but I am talking about advertising as psychological motivational manipulation, setting itself up in an idolatrous consumer dynamic that is harmful. In contrast, true attention would always be a spiritual state, an active waiting animated by faith and love. Now, Audre Lorde, the black American feminist writer, in her book Sister Outsider, has a fascinating essay called Uses of the Erotic. Again, not the sort of thing you might have expected to hear in a Quaker meeting for worship for the purpose of lecturing that we are currently engaged in. And I would draw your attention specifically to this passage here, where she says the dichotomy between the spiritual and the political is also false, resulting from an incomplete attention to our erotic knowledge. For the bridge which connects them is formed by the erotic, the sensual, those physical, emotional and psychic expressions of what is deepest and strongest and richest within each of us being shared. The passions of love in its deepest meanings. Now let me just unpack a bit as to what Lorde is getting at here. Lorde is saying that the true erotic, in the sense she's using it, which goes far beyond the sexual, which is about eros, the passions of love in all their meanings, which is about an incarnate theology, a theology of both spirit and matter being infused, which is what Christian theology is. That the true erotic is when sensation is combined with the relationality of the heart. In other words, ethical consumerism, or ethical consumption, I should say. In contrast, she says, pornography is when you have sensation, or you seek sensation, devoid of the relationality of the human heart. Now, to me, that is a hugely important distinction. It's a distinction that goes far beyond the feminist studies with which she was concerned here, and which can be applied to the kind of consumerism I have been talking about. I would put it to you that consumerism, in the way we have just been looking at it, is fundamentally pornographic. It reflects and it creates a pornographic society, a society that operates devoid of the heart, and that our task in Quaker and any other form of ethical business is to call back the soul, to reconstitute the heart of the matter. I want to move lastly to my case study on how can we move beyond that? Can we move beyond it? There is a beautiful mountain on the right in the national scenic area of Scotland, in South Harris, just about 15 miles from where your Harris tweed jacket came from. It's called Mount Ronyeval. It was actually the first mountain as such that I climbed as a boy. Beautiful medieval church there. And in 1991, a company called Redland proposed turning it into the biggest roadstone quarry in the world. Well, I'd just come back from Papua New Guinea, where I'd been to Bougainville and seen the Bougainville Civil War sparked by the copper mine there, so I was studying the question of the impact of huge developments on small places, and I came to the conclusion that this was a bad idea. A few of us, a very small number of us, started campaigning on it. One of the things I did was to bring a Native American, at that time sacred peace pipe carrier, Stulian Stone Eagle Herney, over to testify in the government public inquiry alongside Professor MacLeod of the Free Church and myself as a Quaker. By the end of the public inquiry, not just because of our input, but because of a great many inputs from NGOs and from Scottish Natural Heritage, because of many voices coming in, there was a massive swing of local opinion against it. The political decision as to whether it could go ahead or not was postponed for such a long time that the share price of Redland started to fall, at which point the French company Lafarge came in and took over Redland in a predatory takeover. So basically, as a result of hostile action from campaigners, Redland lost sovereignty of their company because they had fallen foul of corporate social responsibility. WWF International was also very much involved because they were in a partnership with Lafarge. So now the super quarry was in Lafarge's hands. You had WWF saying, well, hang on, this gives us a problem with our partnership. You can't be doing this when you're in partnership with us. And in the meantime, this French banker, Thierry Goussin here, happened on holiday to read my book Soil and Soul, in which I'm talking about this story, and he got in touch with me. I took him up the mountain, as you can see there, with his son, and at the top of the mountain he gets on the phone and he's saying to his business friends back in France, I don't believe that the CEO of Lafarge can understand what is being done in his company's name. Will he arrange for Alistair McIntosh to meet with his executives? So that was what happened. I went to the Paris office here and met with 3 of the vice presidents who you see there, and then they came with me to the Isle of Harris to see for themselves. And to cut a very long story short, they decided to pull out from the project because it was bad for their reputational management. It reflected badly on the corporation. And we said to them, look, if you do that, we won't rub your nose in it. We will treat it as a triumph for corporate ethics. We won't trample on your grave, but we will respect your decision, because it was a hairline decision within that company. Well, the next thing I know is they get on to me and say, well, Alistair, Michel Picard here got on to me and said, well, Alistair, you've shown us what you're against, but we all use quarry products. Are you willing to show us what you're for? What should we be doing as the world's biggest cement company? What should we be doing to do our business in a better way? Will you come on to our sustainability stakeholder panel? So they invited me to speak to their people. That's me being shown around one of their quarries in Italy. Notice, by the way, the form of regeneration here. There's the original forest. They're taking out a layer of rock, and then they cover it back over again and seed it over so that you don't see too much. I mean, this was a showpiece, obviously, but it's interesting what they can sometimes do these days by way of minimizing environmental impact and restoring the sites. So they asked me if I would come on after I'd given a lecture to them, gave them the full-on works about why we had stood against them in Harris. They asked me if I would come on their board. Well, I went back to a number of in fact, all of the key campaigners on the Harris Super Quarry campaign that I'd been involved with and said, what do you think I should do? Because they do have a point. We all use quarry products. And the unanimous advice was, do it, but don't take payment for it. take expenses, take your full expenses, but don't be paid by them, or that will suck you in, or at least it will lose the appearance of your objectivity. So I agreed to come on to the panel. Here is a kind of people on the panel. You've got two people here who are senior trade union representatives. You've got Jean-Paul from WWF International, Philippe, who's involved with an NGO that's involved with housing quality, Karina from Foreign and Colonial, as it used to be, Asset Management, very switched on woman on ethical investment, Frank Rose, who several of you in this room know, the former Sustainability Vice President of ICI, myself, Livia, who's an ecological architect, Cornice from the United Nations Environmental Programme, and we've just got a new member, Sheila Karma, from the Africa Centre for Economic Transformation. And basically, everything that Lafarge does socially and environmentally is exposed to us. And we've got the power to call the highest people. I mean, in effect, if I wanted, I could have a meeting with Bruno Lafont, the CEO of Lafarge, tomorrow, if it was really necessary, and I'm quite sure he would make time to see me or any of the other panel members. They treat it very, very seriously, because as Bruno puts it, our value is our values. That in this business, they are very concerned with what they call their license to operate. And by license to operate, they mean how they are perceived by governments, by communities, by the various stakeholders. So the purpose of the stakeholder panel is to involve these various types of stakeholder and to say, what should we be doing? So they bring before us difficult issues that are coming up, or sometimes, like I've been bringing before them recently, the question of free, prior and informed consent under the 2007 UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Now, this is new stuff for the extractive industries. And I have to say, they sit down with us. If we ask questions, they will do their research and come back to us. At the end of the day, we contribute in two ways in their sustainability report. We write a collective page, you see here, which is the opinion of the stakeholder panel, in which we give our collective opinion on the various things they're working on. And we also get an individual bit in which I'm entirely free, and so is each other member, to say exactly what we want about Lafarge in this little column here. Also, if you Google Lafarge Sustainability, you'll find that my website page, in which I reveal everything, including the expenses I claim for travel and accommodation on it, you'll find that that comes up at something like number 3 or number 4 under Lafarge Sustainability. So there's no way they can, having set this going, they cannot escape from it. Now, this has huge credibility with investors. I mean, I've had an investor phone me up a year ago and asked me about the process as part of their decision making. Livia was telling us the other day that she was talking to a leading European pension fund investor who said that when she's asked about, or when he or she is asked about sustainability reporting, the one that she always points people to as an example of good practice is the Lafarge one, because it's such a credible process that is involved. The big question, of course, is it just greenwash? Am I complicit in greenwashing doing this? Now, I must say, I am the first person who say to Lafarge, when you are doing something right, like your biodiversity restoration plans, etc., make good public relations use of it. Because if you do not stay profitable, then you'll go the way that Redland went. So don't take any advice from us that's not going to be consistent with profitability. Otherwise, you're going to go under. But the advice that we give you will aid your long-term profitability. And we've been going now for a number of years, and the senior board of Lafarge are convinced that that is true, which is why they put such emphasis on the importance of this panel.